Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of FinTech Fridays. I'm joined by a special guest this week. I mean, they're always special guests, but Brad Blumberg's joining. Brad is the founder of Aster Key, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But Brad, you and I met in the most random way possible, probably getting on 3 years ago now, at least 2.5 years ago. We were at FinTech Meetup in Vegas, which was an awesome event, by the way. I don't know about you. I thought it was pretty cool.
I like the software. They had that cool meeting software where
Yeah,
before you could ask to meet 10 people and then you would meet with them. It was
it
pretty
was
cool.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of that, you just jarred my memory because I'm like, how did we end up at the same lunch table? Well, I think part of it is the algorithm in that app kind of pointed us to certain tables to have lunch at, and lo and behold, we're at a table together, sitting next to each other, and started having conversations about what each of us were doing, and there was a lot of parallels. So um, it's awesome to see you having success in the mortgage industry, and I'm so glad you agreed to spend a few minutes with me on the podcast today.
Thank you. We're working towards success. It's not there yet.
We all are, man. We all are. It's a work in progress. The fact that we're here doing what we're doing is success to some degree, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Startups are fun.
Yeah. So before we get into Aster Key, can you just share a little bit of your background with the audience, kind of, what you've done in your career and specifically, what you've done in the product space from a technology perspective? And I think that'll be a good transition into what Aster Key is all about.
Sure. So I literally grew up in the other side, the real estate industry. So my mom was a real estate broker. I put in lots of real estate signs over the years, and I think that's that's where it all started for me. And that was my initially probably wrong perception of the mortgage industry because I remember the realtors just don't screw up my deal. That's all they
Right.
wanted out of their mortgage guys. Like
Right.
just don't mess it up.
It's a pretty low
So
bar, right?
yeah, it's a low bar. So the last startup we did was actually in real estate. So I kind of meshed the real estate background with tech, and that was actually my first startup. And what we did, it was pre-iPhone. So mobile was just getting started. It had those feature phones. And we invented how you would search for real estate. And we had to go to the wireless carriers and ask for permission to hit the GPS. They thought that was really secret, that people
Yeah.
wouldn't want their location, disclosed. So we became the first real estate app. And we ended up, after trials and tribulations, it ended up we powered most of the real estate franchisers. So from Keller Williams, 80,000 agents, Berkshire, 55,000 agents. Used to be called Realgy at that time, all the Anywhere brands,
Yep.
Century 21, Sotheby's. Like if you looked at, there used to be a thing, Real Trends. I don't know if it's still around. Real Trends, top 1,000 brokers in the US. We probably did 500 of them.
Yeah.
So we we did, I've told this to Brian, we've done what Brian has accomplished in mortgage. That was us in real estate, where we were white labeling all the products for all the real estate brokers. So if you used any of their mobile apps, that was us in the background powering all, there's a couple 100,000 agents behind these real estate brokers firms. So that's the business we ran. And then about 3 years ago it was acquired. So we ran that for like a decade. And it was acquired, and oddly enough, everyone had started doing mobile. I mean, we were mobile pre-Zillow doing mobile,
Yeah.
pre-iPhone, and then, but we were required for the data. It was really that we got really good at handling. At the time, there were 650 MLSs. Now it's kind of consolidating, but taking in all that data and keeping it up to date and the lead flow, and that's what we got acquired for. So then that leads into what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who acquired you, by the way?
Keller Williams. They were
Oh,
one
there
of
you
our
go.
largest customers, and they wanted to bring it in house. So yeah,
Very interesting.
yeah,
And so they apparently, I mean, they still use the tech. It's probably a different flavor of the tech today, right?
yeah. A lot of my guys, it's still recent enough where I think at least half the team still works at Keller Williams. So
Yeah.
They're doing all the data in the background for all the things. And that's how a lot of the big franchises were using the data, not just for mobile, but they would pump it to their web, they would use it for analytics. So once that's where I kind of learned it's usually all about the data. If you can streamline the data and get the data to work, you can do some cool things with it.
For sure.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue into Aster Key, right?
Yeah.
And Aster Key is all about the data. And what I love about the way you position the product is it's really about consumer permission, consumer controlled, and consumer protection of the data. Never has that been more important to all of us as consumers. So give us the overview of Aster Key, but I'm really super interested in like what was the aha moment that led you down that path?
So, when you do a startup and you get acquired, you kind of help the company that acquires you, but then your mind starts working like, what's next? Like,
Right.
I need a big, because you learned something the first time, you're like, oh, I could do this faster, cheaper, which we'll see if that proves true. But yeah. So I was looking for something big and meaty to do. I was like, I need a big problem, like not just like a lifestyle kind
Yeah.
of business or something incremental. Like I want to solve something big. So one thing I started noticing, and this is about when I met you, is I've always done, because of my family background, my dad is an architect and my brother, we've always done little development, like little side projects, apartment building, office buildings. So I happen to always have a dozen mortgages at any one time. I realized even about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, I started getting letters from everybody in the chain that I have a mortgage, whether it was the lender, whether it was the marketing company they used, the servicer that ended up with the mortgage, the title company. I started getting letters from everyone saying, we're sorry. The data that we, took in from you, whether it was recent or 3 years ago, and they still had it, they're like, we lost it. It's been hacked.
Yeah.
And I was just like curious because I never really thought about it. Like, I'm like, does everyone have like leaky databases? Like, is this a database problem? Like, why is no one can hold on to my data? So I just, the R&D, the curiosity, like every entrepreneur, like go down a rabbit hole and figure it out and look. And it was obvious. I realized a couple things. First thing, so obvious, but I don't know that we think about it that way, is we don't own our financial personas. Like
Right.
we work our whole lives. You have this financial persona, but even like athletes, I've seen even the athletes now own their image and likeness.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You have no control over your financial persona. It's owned by credit bureaus and data brokers, and they sell it. And you can't say, don't send my data here. I mean, somewhere buried in somebody's terms of use, you're probably giving, it's not fair consent,
Right.
but it's in there. And so I realized, if we're renters of our own data, that's part of the problem. Because if
Yep.
I own apartment buildings, and the renters don't take as good care of it as owners. Some do, some don't, but you want to own it. And then when I looked at the process, I never realized how complicated the mortgage process was, how many hands touch the data when you go for an approval, whether it goes to a marketing firm, a CRM firm, a database, all these tech vendors, two Fannie, two Freddie, two servicers, two title companies, checking credit. So if you're wondering why you get hacked, there's always going to be a weak link. And I came away thinking, if you apply, it's not just mortgage, it's any finance.
Yeah.
I picked mortgage because it's complicated,
Right.
the most complicated. So if you apply for a mortgage, 90% chance you're going to get hacked somewhere, sometime. It's just the way the data rules are. And so I was like, let's solve that. Like that's something I don't hear. And as an entrepreneur, you want to go out far enough where you don't want tons of people trying to solve the problem.
Right.
So, you go out a few years and you're like, all right, like how can I solve this? I don't have a horse in the race. Like I don't have existing database or customers. Like if I could start from scratch, like how would I redo the process? And I ended up thinking, getting to the point where the only way we can protect this US financial system is to empower consumers to control their data more. And that's kind of what Aster Key is. Aster Key is really a way to get lender ready on your own, protect the data. We do all sorts of crazy stuff when we take in that data for a consumer. We strip out the personal data, the social, the the email, the name, and we store it separately on their phone from the financial data. And we just look at that process and started looking, all right, if we can get someone ready on their phone and secure them, we can start the permissioning process that will be a long, another decade journey.
Yeah.
But, we had people reach out to Fannie Freddie and to LOSs, and I started seeing that people would be interested in seeing if you could protect the data all the way through. And you hear people talking about Web 2, Web 3, and I could give it out my data, and then after transaction, if there wasn't a good reason or that company didn't give me a good reason, I could pull it back and say, you're kind of done with this part of it. You don't need to be holding it. It's my data, not your data. And we started thinking about it that way. Like, let's do everything we can to protect the consumer in the mortgage process. And then we kind of work backwards and say, okay, why would a mortgage company care? Like, what
Right.
marketing can we give a mortgage company to say, yeah, this is good? And we came up with a start your loan anonymously channel where, you could start a channel and maybe people come to your website that may not know you or didn't come from a realtor that would want to get ready on their own and communicate with you anonymously and maybe send you their financials. You don't know who they are yet. So we're iterating on that, Brian.
Yeah.
It's really just trying to figure out the market fit. And like you said, it may be that we built this beautiful, we know a lot about mobile front end, but it may be that it just becomes about the data. I mean, 100% for the industry, we're helping lenders just control the data and getting it through the MLS they use. Like we're going through the Encompass process now and
Yeah.
working with them to use IDs instead of maybe the name to do some things in the system in the instance. So we're just figuring it out. I'm kind of learning and getting ideas from our lender partners, and it's just it's a process.
It's a
Yeah.
process, no doubt. The kind of going back to like, why would a lender want to or be interested? I think to me, another value prop, if I put my lender hat on, would be reputation risk, right? And so the last thing any independent mortgage banker needs is, showing up on, having to send one of those letters you described.
Right.
um, that's a big blow to reputation. So I would think over time, as Aster Key can scale, that would be another value add for lenders, is just reputation risk and protection, I would think.
Yeah, it's not something that we've gone out and tried to market, but I know in boardrooms because I've talked to, enough big lenders where now, it's being talked about in boardrooms. I mean, it's
Oh
really
yeah.
scary if you get hit. I mean, we all saw what happened to Loan Depot. I mean, that was a disaster. That was
Right.
$50 million. It's going to wreck their year, their
Yep.
financials. And I know from being, running a tech company, that if something like that happens, whether it's a bug or a hack, it's a fire drill
Yeah.
and you're
Oh
not
yeah.
innovating anymore. You're like trying to put out the fire and fix it and plug it, and it just becomes it's insane. So
Yep.
I think, and now I'm seeing the class action guys coming in, the attorneys, and like they get to go on the stand. They're like, "Did you do everything you could do?
Yeah.
Did you? Does everyone in your company use two-factor authorization? Did you do X? Did you do X?" And it's hard. It's as much cultural to fix the hacking problem as tech.
Yep.
And it's a hard problem. But I think it goes back to the data, and I think we'll be part of that solution. I think in I think in a number of years it'll seem crazy that we once gave our data out and let it just go out. It'll
Right.
it'll like all tech companies when they're young, the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Right.
It's like I don't know. It's not as good as your podcast, but I listen to this podcast called Acquired. You ever see that
Oh
one?
yeah. 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 They're
Right?
much better than mine, by the
Yeah.
way. Just,
But they go over the history of tech companies. They're always
Yeah.
like 3 hour, in depth. And I was just listening. I was driving. I was listening to the Amazon one, and everyone knew about Amazon.
Yeah.
Like uh, Bezos was an investment banker, very well known at D.H. Shaw. and he started this Amazon thing. So Walmart went out and talked to him, and Barnes and Noble went out and talked to him, and they're like, "What?" They're looking at his little tables in his garage where he's sending one book to one person at a time, and
That'll never work.
that'll never work. That's so dumb. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. We drop ship. Barnes and Noble guy said we drop ship 20,000 books to our 200 locations, and it's very
Yeah.
efficient, one to one. And so that's how I see this startup or someone like Aster Key. It's like sometimes you look at it, you're like, well, the juice isn't really worth the squeeze to do that. But over time, you'll look back and say, yeah, that's the way it's going to happen.
So that's such a great analogy. And it wasn't the same podcast you were listening to, but literally like in the last week, that same thread was in another conversation that I was listening to, or I was even having. I can't remember anymore.
Right.
And it could have been a conversation in my head, frankly. But if you think about Amazon right this moment in time, none of us thinks about them as a book company.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're a data and technology company.
Yeah.
It's so that's where, like, fast forward 10 years, the use case that you've brought to market is highly likely not going to be what you're known for at Aster Key, right? It'll be something bigger for sure.
Right.
That we
I
may
just gotta hope I get there before rockets. That usually happens in 3 years. All the big guys come in after you work really hard. They're like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Let's go try to crush that."
No, we've seen that from time to time with not that we're doing anything that's like, I would call it revolutionary or inventive, but there certainly are companies with more resources and capital than I have. So
yeah, it's hard to catch you guys though. Now you've done such a nice job. Yeah,
we're doing I look at our products as very complementary in terms of we're ultimately serving the mortgage industry, but I think we're trying to solve different problems in the industry. And I think both are worthy problems. I think for FinLocker, it's all about, educate and engage and help lenders have a reason for consumers to engage them before they're raising their hand saying they're ready to apply.
Mm-hmm.
And then clearly we've talked about the massive problem that you all are working on solving around data security. And I'm curious now, just to pivot for a minute, if I can indulge you, as you think beyond mortgage, right? Because presumably, if you can solve this in mortgage, and this is probably why you started here, it's kind of like dodgeball, right? If you can dodge an anvil, you can dodge this little ball. So,
right.
if you've solved this for the mortgage transaction, a very complicated, data-rich transaction, then presumably it gets infinitely easier to solve it for other financial services products. Is that kind of some of the vision?
So I think the financial service industry needs to be like this all the way through, whether it's credit cards or auto loans. The consumer just needs to come in. They send you their data. You tell them, you're 90% there or whatever it is, and everyone needs to. It's just about consumer empowerment.
Right.
If you think about all the tech companies that really make it, it's always about you giving the consumer something that seems like magic, like wow. Whether it's Netflix taking all the movie data and letting you watch what you want. I mean, they went to CBS, and CBS was like, "Oh, that's not our model. We don't do that. We put a movie on Sunday and we advertise around it. Why would we let the consumer pick what they want? That'd be insane."
Right.
So it's just everything, even Zillow. I mean, Zillow was all about putting that data out so consumers can see it, and coming up with the Zestimate was the big reveal where you could see what your home is worth. It's all about consumer empowerment. So I feel comfortable that just hasn't happened in mortgage yet.
Yeah.
You can't do mortgage like you can do stocks. It hasn't come yet. And I don't buy that it's so complicated. Like, you're never going to sell me, like, because I've looked at the steps, like, yes, it's complicated, and there's lots of counterparties and there's lots of things going on, but yeah, it can be simplified, and you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about it at its core in mortgage, right? We are all very familiar with the 1003, right? However many data fields exist there today, hundreds. most of those data fields get completed by the consumer providing the data, the information, right?
Right.
Some of it's physical, some of it's digital, it's a combination thereof, some of it's verbal, whatever. But all of it's coming, all of those fields that are important for loan decisioning ultimately come from the consumer. And so why wouldn't we all be just walking around with that data set already under, in our Aster key, right?
Right.
It already present and ready to use. And then instead of the hoops that we as consumers go through, and then we as lenders go through collecting data from consumers who tend to do one of these things every 7 years, so they're never going to get good at applying for a
Exactly.
mortgage.
Right.
It's just like, let's leverage the technology that exists in a way that, to your point, not only empowers consumers but ultimately protects them. And frankly, how many companies exist that live off of our data as consumers? And to your point earlier, we have no say or choice in how they're using that, but they're
No,
using
you
it.
should be compensated for it. Like I actually believe like the credit bureaus, I think they're past the point where they should hold your data. Can they
Yeah,
score it and be one of the people that score your data? Sure. That, but I don't think they should hold it anymore.
right.
I think they've lost that right with all the crazy stuff and how they sell and data brokers and I think CFPB is moving that way.
Oh yeah,
I think they're saying now, you can't sign those vendor agreements that say, "Hey, marketing company, we're gonna give you all our AT&T data and you go do stuff with it, and you're gonna hold us harmless if you screw it up." Because like the
right.
FCC just came down and slammed AT&T and said, "No, you're gonna pay a fine. You
Yeah,
can't do that. Like you need to know what's going on with the data that you take in." So I think it is the wheels are slowly because it's becoming a national security issue. That's
yeah, yeah,
what's
yeah,
going to
yeah,
be the driver. That they're saying, hey, if X country knows that a service person in the military, has lots of debt, like that becomes
mm,
someone to, that they could bribe, give money to, do something, blackmail. So I think and that's what's happening with all these breaches. Countries, bad
yeah,
countries, hackers, they're doing personas on you.
yeah,
They want to be you, like know everything about you. So it's not that you get hacked. Like everyone now is like, oh yeah, I got hacked, big deal. But they're creating personas, and the more and more times they go in, the more damage they're going to do when they want to actually do something. So it's becoming a national security issue as well. So I think that'll drive it because no one says no to national security money.
I should have opened the episode by advising that if you're going to watch this, you might want to watch it sometime around breakfast, because if you watch it in the afternoon or in the evening, you might not sleep tonight, because this is some serious stuff, man.
I think it is serious stuff,
It is
but
very serious.
we'll fix it. They're a great country. I mean, I always say I see like all these hackers, like the Roman Empire and all the Vandals, picking it apart piece by piece over years. That's how I see these hackers. They're just coming to
Yeah.
our financial system and picking it off. But since we're kind of a young country, I think we have time to. We don't have 1,000 years under our belt, so yeah.
Well, as long as we have smart people like you and the folks in Aster Key, I feel like I'll sleep better tonight. So, Brad,
We'll see.
thanks for coming on, man. I love catching up. I love learning about, as I said before we hit record, I love learning about cool people with cool products at cool companies. You guys are definitely doing not just cool things, but very needed things for not just the mortgage industry, but for all of us as consumers. So thank you for pushing this big issue.
Yeah, Brian, thank you. You've taught me tons about mortgage. You're one of my go-tos. Really over the last since we've met. I mean, just being on LinkedIn and learning from you, it's been invaluable. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm not sure when we're going to publish this, but I'll say it anyway. I'm looking forward to catching up with you in person at the Mortgage Bankers event in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Bye-bye.
Until then, everybody come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of FinTech Fridays. See y'all.
All right. Bye-bye.